What happens when a powerful billionaire meets a kind-hearted nurse in the quiet corridors of a hospital? At St. Augustine Medical Center, a single glance between Charlotte Evans and Oliver Hartman would ignite a love so deep it would cost him everything: his empire, his reputation, his most closely guarded secrets. She saw right through his walls. He found his soul in her eyes. But what happened that night? No one there could have ever imagined. If this story touches you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive. Tentar novamente. The silence of St. Augustine Medical Center in Boston carried the weight of lives suspended between hope and farewell. It was a gray Thursday in October when Charlotte Evans adjusted her stethoscope around her neck and walked through the pediatric ward corridors, her gentle footsteps echoing against the polished floor. She had that rare gift, transforming cold environments into refuges of human warmth just with her presence. On the other side of the hospital, Oliver Hartman walked through those same corridors with a discreet entourage. A billionaire mogul at 34, he visited the hospital not for performative charity, but out of a silent need to find something real amid the artificial world he'd built around himself. Impeccable suit, upright posture, eyes that seemed to calculate every movement, but inside a restlessness he couldn't even name. It was in room 314 that their worlds collided. Charlotte was kneeling beside Ethan's bed, a 6-year-old boy with leukemia, his blonde hair almost gone, but his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Did you know that dinosaurs were also afraid of needles?" she whispered, gently running her hand over the boy's forehead. "Really?" Ethan laughed softly, momentarily forgetting his pain. "Really? The T-Rex was the worst of all. When he saw a syringe, he'd run screaming through the forest." Oliver stopped at the doorway, invisible to both of them. Something in his rigid posture softened. He watched how Charlotte held Ethan's small hand while the nurse administered the medication, how her touch seemed to absorb the boy's pain and transform it into courage. There were no cameras, no audience, just pure humanity. "All done, champ," Charlotte smiled. "You were braver than any dinosaur." When she turned to leave, her eyes met Oliver's. Time stopped. It wasn't physical attraction, it was recognition. As if their souls knew each other from somewhere memory couldn't reach. "Sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know someone was here." Oliver should have responded formally, introduced himself with titles and positions. Instead, he heard himself saying, "You have a special gift with children." Charlotte tilted her head, studying him. There was something in his eyes, a vulnerability he tried to hide behind authority. They just need to be truly seen. It's not hard when you care. And you care. "Always." She paused. "Are you visiting someone?" "Actually, I'm getting to know the hospital. My foundation makes donations here." "Ah." A small smile curved her lips. "So you're one of those billionaires who shows up once a year, takes photos for the magazine, and disappears?" Her frankness surprised him. Most people treated him with rehearsed reverence. "Not exactly," he replied, and for the first time in years, smiled genuinely, though I understand the skepticism. "It's not skepticism," Charlotte said, walking toward the door. "It's just that usually you guys are more interested in the tax deduction than the people." She passed by him, and Oliver caught the subtle scent of lavender mixed with something indefinable. Maybe kindness, if kindness had a smell. "What if I told you I'm not like most people?" Charlotte stopped at the door and turned around. For a moment they stared at each other in silence. There was an electric current in the air, a mutual curiosity neither could name. "Then I'd say," she spoke slowly, "that you're going to have to prove it." Oliver watched her disappear down the corridor, feeling something awaken in his chest. Something he'd buried long ago under financial reports and board meetings. For the first time in years, he wanted to prove something to someone. Not to impress, but to be seen. He returned to room 314, where Ethan was playing with a plastic dinosaur. "Hey, champ," Oliver said softly. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan looked at him curiously. "Sure." "Charlotte, is she always like this? So cool?" Ethan finished. "Always. She tells the best stories, and she never lies to us about bad stuff. She tells the truth, but in a way that doesn't hurt so much. Oliver nodded slowly. Truth without cruelty. When was the last time someone had spoken to him like that? Do you like her? Ethan asked with the brutal honesty of children. Oliver smiled. I barely know her. But you want to know her, right? I can see it in your eyes. It's the same look I have when I really want something. The wisdom of a 6-year-old hit him like lightning. Oliver said goodbye to Ethan and walked through the corridors looking for Charlotte. He found her at the nurse's station, organizing medical charts with the same gentleness she used to comfort patients. Charlotte? She looked up, and again that electric current. My name is Oliver, he said. Oliver Hartman. And I'd really like to prove that I'm not like most people. Would you have dinner with me? Just the two of us. No cameras, no magazine. Just conversation. Charlotte studied him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, but also the loneliness. Why me? Because, Oliver hesitated, searching for words to describe something he couldn't define. Because when you look at me, you don't see a name in Forbes magazine. You see me. And in that moment, in the middle of a hospital full of life and death, began a story that would change them both forever. The Jardin secret restaurant was hidden among hydrangea bushes in Back Bay, a place few knew about, and even fewer could get reservations for. Oliver had chosen it deliberately, not for its exclusivity but for its intimacy. Soft candlelight danced over rustic wooden tables, and a string quartet played Debussy in the background, creating an atmosphere that whispered secrets instead of shouting them. Charlotte arrived 5 minutes late, wearing a simple navy blue dress that brought out her honey-colored eyes. She stopped at the entrance, clearly out of her comfort zone, but determined. Oliver stood up from the table, feeling his heart race in a way that financial spreadsheets had never managed to provoke. "You came," he said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "Did you doubt I would?" Charlotte smiled, accepting the chair he pulled out for her. "I thought you might have changed your mind. Pediatric nurses probably don't have dinner with strangers very often. Billionaires probably don't invite nurses to secret restaurants either." She looked around, admiring the details. "How did you find this place?" Oliver hesitated. The truth was that he'd asked his assistant to research the most intimate and least photographed restaurant in Boston. Instead, he said, "Sometimes I need to escape from the world. And does the world include people like me?" "No," he replied immediately, surprising himself with how quickly he answered. "The world is board meetings, dinners with people who talk about money like it's poetry, events where everyone smiles but no one really connects. You're different." The waiter brought sparkling water and took their orders. Charlotte chose grilled salmon. Oliver, without even looking at the menu, ordered the same thing. She noticed. "You don't even know what it is, do you?" "What?" "The dish. You didn't even read it." Oliver laughed, a sound that seemed rusty from lack of use. "You caught me. I was more interested in watching how you hold the menu." "What do you mean?" "You read each description like it's a little story. Your eyes light up when you find something that sparks your curiosity, and you bite your lower lip when you're deciding." Charlotte unconsciously touched her lip. "You're very observant, only about things that interest me." A comfortable silence settled between them. Charlotte twirled her water glass between her hands, and Oliver found himself mesmerized by the movement, so simple but full of unconscious grace. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Anything. Why were you really at the hospital today? And don't tell me it was just a routine foundation visit." Oliver set down his fork, impressed by her perception. "You don't accept easy answers, do you? Not when I can see there's more underneath." He took a deep breath. "My younger brother died in a hospital when I was 16. Leukemia, like Ethan. I was so focused on not crying, on being strong for my parents, that I never really processed it. Visiting pediatric hospitals is my way of, I don't know, trying to understand something I didn't understand back then." Charlotte reached across the table and gently touched his hand. The contact was electric, but gentle. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Pain like that doesn't have an expiration date." She didn't pull her hand away. "What was his name?" "David. He was 12 and obsessed with astronomy. He wanted to be an astronaut." You talk about him in the past tense, but he's still present for you, isn't he? Oliver looked at her, really looked. How could she see through him so easily? How do you do that? What? Know me without knowing me. Charlotte smiled softly. Maybe it's because you hide behind so many layers that when someone sees beyond them, it seems like magic. But it's not. It's just attention. No one's ever paid attention to me like that, because you don't let them. But with me, she paused. With me, you're letting yourself. Dinner arrived, but neither of them seemed interested in the food. The conversation flowed as if they were old friends reuniting after years apart. Tell me about your parents, Oliver asked. My dad was a mechanic. My mum was an elementary school teacher. They met when her car broke down on the highway. Dad always said it was love at first sight, but Mum insisted it was just urgency. She had papers to grade. Charlotte smiled fondly. They died in an accident when I was 22. You were all alone. Completely. That's when I decided I wanted to work with children. They see the world more honestly, less complicated. You never married? Had a serious relationship? Charlotte hesitated. There was someone in college. Michael. We dated for 3 years, almost got married. But he wanted me to be smaller, quieter, less intense about caring for others. And you chose to be yourself. Always. Life's too short to be a diminished version of who we are. Oliver felt something stir in his chest. Admiration, desire, something deeper he couldn't name. You're extraordinary. I'm normal. You're just used to people who pretend. They finished dinner talking about books, movies, dreams. Charlotte discovered that Oliver had studied literature before economics, that he still secretly wrote poetry, that his favorite color was green because it reminded him of his mother's eyes. Oliver discovered that Charlotte read 3 books a month, that she sang in the shower, that her biggest fear was not being able to make enough of a difference in the world. When it was time to leave, neither of them wanted the night to end. Can I drive you home? Oliver offered. Thanks, but I took the subway. Charlotte. She turned on the sidewalk, and the restaurant's light illuminated her face like a Renaissance painting. Yes? I'd really like to see you again. Not for another formal dinner, just to be with you anywhere, doing anything. Charlotte studied him for a long moment. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, hope mixed with fear of rejection. Coffee tomorrow night? I know a small place that stays open late. Yes, he replied immediately. Anywhere you choose. She stepped closer and lightly kissed his cheek. The scent of lavender enveloped him again, and Oliver closed his eyes, memorizing the moment. Until tomorrow, Oliver. He watched her walk toward the subway station, and for the first time in years he couldn't think about work, meetings, anything except the way she had said his name, like it was something precious. Midnight Pages Cafe was the kind of place that existed for book lovers and romantic insomniacs. Hidden in a Beacon Hill alley, it stayed open until 2 in the morning, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and worn leather armchairs that held the stories of everyone who had ever dreamed in them. Charlotte arrived first, choosing a table in the most secluded corner, where amber light created an atmosphere of shared secrets. Oliver appeared promptly at 10 at night, but something had changed about him. The impeccable suit was replaced by dark jeans and a grey wool sweater that made him look younger, more approachable, more real. You look different, Charlotte observed when he sat across from her. Different how? Less armored. She tilted her head, studying him. I like it. They ordered coffee and, without realizing it, began a ritual that would repeat for the next few weeks. Conversations that stretched until the cafe closed, walks through the empty gardens of Boston Common, meetings in old libraries where they whispered about books as if they were conspirators, sharing state secrets. It was in the 3rd week that Oliver realized he was completely lost. Have you ever noticed, Charlotte said one night as they walked along the Charles River, how people stop really seeing each other after a while? They get used to one another and forget to pay attention. Is that why you never stop observing? That's why I never want to stop observing you, she replied, and the words came out more intimate than she had planned. Oliver stopped walking. Charlotte. Sorry, I shouldn't have. No. He turned to her, his eyes intense in the moonlight. Don't apologize. not for speaking the truth. They were very close now, and Charlotte could feel the warmth emanating from his body, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something purely masculine. "Oliver, what are we doing?" "I don't know," he whispered, raising his hand to gently touch her face. "But I know I can't stop." She was the one who closed the distance between them, standing on her tiptoes to meet his lips. The kiss was hesitant at first, more of a question than a statement. But when Oliver pulled her closer, deepening the contact, something ignited between them. They separated breathlessly, forehead against forehead. "Come with me," Oliver murmured against her lips. 40 minutes later, they were on the top floor of the Hartman building, in Oliver's office that occupied the entire floor. Boston's lights spread like stars at their feet, creating a private universe where only they existed. "This is where you spend most of your time," Charlotte said, walking toward the enormous windows. "Used to, before I met you." Oliver loosened the tie he didn't even realize he was still wearing and approached her from behind. "Now I can't concentrate on anything but you." Charlotte turned in his arms, and this time there was no hesitation. The kiss was hunger and thirst at the same time, months of unspoken tension releasing in a moment. Oliver's hands got lost in her hair, and she sighed his name against his mouth. "Oliver," like a prayer. He gently pressed her against the cold window, their bodies fitting together as if they had been made for each other. "Are you sure?" he whispered, looking deep into her eyes. "I've been sure since that first day at the hospital," she replied, pulling him into another kiss. What happened next was more than desire. It was devotion. Oliver carried her to the leather sofa in his office, the city lights being the only witnesses to their mutual surrender. He unbuttoned her blouse with trembling fingers, kissing every inch of revealed skin as if it were sacred. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her collarbone, and Charlotte arched under his touch. When the last pieces of clothing were removed, they stared at each other for a long moment, vulnerable and exposed, but unafraid. Oliver traced the outline of her face with reverent fingers. "I love you," he said, the words escaping before he could censor them. "I love you too," she replied without hesitation, pulling him into a kiss that sealed the confession. They moved together in a slow, intense dance, bodies learning and recognizing each other. Oliver was gentle but passionate, his hands exploring every curve while whispering words of adoration in her ear. Charlotte surrendered completely, nails gently scratching his back as he moved inside her, with a reverence that made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. They made love as if they had all the time in the universe, alternating between moments of desperate urgency and infinitely tender caresses. When Charlotte cried out his name at climax, Oliver followed her, burying his face in her neck and whispering promises he wasn't even sure he could keep. Afterward, they remained intertwined on the sofa, Charlotte nestled against his chest, listening to the heartbeat she now knew as her own. "What do we do now?" she asked, tracing lazy circles on his skin. "Now," Oliver said, kissing the top of her head, "we figure out how to make this work. Because I can't lose you, Charlotte. Not after this." She lifted herself to look at him, seeing the raw vulnerability in his eyes. "You won't lose me. But Oliver, your world and mine." "There is no world of mine without you in it," he interrupted, pulling her into another kiss. "We'll figure it out together." In the following weeks, they became masters of discretion. Meetings in hidden places, messages in code, late-night phone calls when the longing became too much. Oliver would cancel meetings to have lunch with her at small bistros where no one knew them. Charlotte would switch shifts to meet him at his office after everyone had left. It was a love made of stolen hours and furtive moments, but it was more real than anything either of them had ever experienced. "Sometimes," Charlotte said one night, lying in his arms after another passionate night in his office, "I wonder if we're living in a bubble that's going to burst." Oliver tightened his arms around her. "Then we live intensely while it lasts." But both knew that bubbles, no matter how beautiful, eventually burst. And when theirs finally did, the fall would be devastating. For now, though, they had this pure, true, and secret love, blooming in the shadows of two worlds that might never be able to fully meet. Charlotte noticed it first in the morning, when the smell of coffee that always awakened her with pleasure now triggered a wave of nausea that sent her running to the bathroom. She braced her hands on the cold sink, breathing deeply, trying to rationalize. Work stress, maybe. A virus. Anything but the possibility that was beginning to take shape in her mind. But the signs were accumulating, like evidence she could no longer ignore. The breast tenderness she'd attributed to her menstrual cycle, the fatigue that came in inexplicable waves, the period that should have arrived a week ago, and especially the way her body seemed different, more sensitive, more aware of itself, as if it were keeping a secret only she could discover. On Tuesday, during her break at the hospital, Charlotte found herself at the corner pharmacy, staring at the pregnancy test shelf as if they were alien artifacts. Her hands were shaking when she finally chose one, paying with her face burning from a mixture of anticipation and terror. "Are you all right, dear?" asked the elderly pharmacist, noticing her paleness. "I'm fine, thank you," Charlotte murmured, hiding the small box in her purse as if it were contraband. Back at her apartment, she held the box for long minutes before opening it. There was something definitive about that moment. Before the test, there were still possibilities, doubts, denials. After, there would only be truth. In the tiny bathroom of her apartment, with hands still trembling, Charlotte followed the instructions with the precision of someone accustomed to medical procedures. 3 minutes. Just 3 minutes to find out if her entire life had changed. She couldn't wait in the bathroom. She paced around the living room, organized magazines that were already organized, washed dishes that were already clean. When she finally returned, 2 pink lines stared back at her from the counter like a verdict. Pregnant. Charlotte slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold bathroom floor, the test still in her hands. For a moment, an involuntary smile curved her lips. There was life growing inside her, a small combination of her and Oliver. But the smile quickly faded when reality imposed itself. How was she going to tell him? How were they going to handle this? Their relationship was already complicated enough, existing on the margins of the 2 worlds they inhabited. A baby would make everything infinitely more complex. That night, Oliver arrived at her apartment with white roses and the smile he reserved only for her. "How was your day, my love?" Charlotte was making tea with her back to him, trying to gather courage. "It was interesting." Something in her tone made him approach. "Interesting how?" She turned around and Oliver immediately noticed something different in her eyes, a mixture of joy and fear that made him stop in the middle of the kitchen. "What happened?" Charlotte took a deep breath, words forming and dissolving in her throat. "Oliver, have you ever thought about having children? With you?" The answer came immediately, surprising them both. Constantly. Charlotte's heart raced. "Even knowing how complicated our situation is?" "Charlotte, what's happening?" Oliver approached, taking her hands in his. "You're scaring me." She looked at their intertwined hands, gathering courage. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed seemed to last hours. Oliver remained completely still, processing the words. "Pregnant," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "I found out today. 3 tests, all positive." Charlotte tried to read his expression, but he seemed in shock. "Oliver, say something." Slowly a smile spread across his face, genuine, radiant, transformative. "We're going to have a baby?" "We're going to have a baby," she confirmed, and then he wrapped her in his arms, spinning her around the small kitchen while laughing like a child. "I love you," he whispered against her ear. "I love you so much, and I love this baby I can't even see yet." Charlotte melted in his arms, feeling immense relief. "Are you sure? Because it's going to change everything, Oliver. Absolutely everything." "I know." He set her down, holding her face between his hands. "And I want it to change. I want a future with you, Charlotte. I want a family with you. I always have. I just didn't know how to ask." That night, they stayed up late, talking about names, about what the baby would be like, about how they were going to organize their lives. Oliver placed his hand over Charlotte's still flat belly, marveled by the miracle happening there. "Do you think he can hear me?" he asked. "It's still very early, but—" Charlotte covered his hand with hers. "Maybe he can already feel when you're here." "Then I'll talk to him every day," Oliver decided, gently kissing her belly. "Hi, little one. I'm your daddy. And I already love you more than I imagined possible." But in the following weeks, reality began to impose itself with growing force. Charlotte suffered from morning sickness that left her exhausted, and hiding it at work became increasingly difficult. Oliver was more protective, more present, cancelling important trips and meetings to take care of her, which didn't go unnoticed by his assistant and the board of directors. One afternoon, while Charlotte rested on the couch in her apartment, Oliver brought ginger tea and saltine crackers. "You have to stop cancelling appointments because of me," she said, accepting the tea. "People are going to start getting suspicious. Let them suspect. You and the baby are my priority." "Oliver," Charlotte took his hand, "what if this goes wrong? What if the world finds out before we're ready? What if—" "Hey." He knelt beside the couch, looking directly into her eyes. "No matter what happens, we're going to face it together. You, me, and our child. We're a family now." Charlotte nodded, trying to believe it would be that simple. But deep down, a small voice whispered that nothing about their lives would be simple, and that love, no matter how strong, might not be enough to protect them from the approaching storm. For now, though, they had this moment, a life growing between them, love blooming despite the impossibilities, and the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, happy endings were possible even for people from different worlds. The first photo appeared on the cover of the Boston Herald on a grey December morning. Charlotte was leaving a prenatal appointment, her hand unconsciously over her belly that was beginning to show a subtle curve, when she saw the newsstands on the hospital corner. Her own face stared back at her, next to Oliver in a grainy image taken with a telephoto lens. "Billionaire and the Nurse, Secret Romance Exposed," screamed the headline in bold letters. Her legs nearly gave out. With trembling hands, she bought the newspaper and read the first lines. "Oliver Hartman, CEO of Hartman Industries and one of Boston's richest men, has been maintaining a secret relationship with Charlotte Evans, a 28-year-old pediatric nurse. Sources close to the situation reveal that the couple has been meeting secretly for months." The phone rang. "Oliver." "Charlotte, did you see it?" "I'm looking at it now," she whispered, her voice almost disappearing. "How did they find out?" "I don't know. My lawyers are already investigating, but—" There was desperation in his voice. "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." "No!" The word came out harsher than she intended. "Oliver, that'll make everything worse. If they see us together now—" But it was already too late. In the next few hours, the story spread like wildfire. Gossip websites, television shows, social media. Everyone was speculating about the unlikely romance between the mogul and the simple nurse. The photos multiplied. Them entering the restaurant, walking through the park, her leaving his building at dawn. At the hospital, Charlotte felt the looks change instantly. Colleagues who used to greet her warmly now whispered in corners, stopping their conversations when she approached. The nursing supervisor called her into her office that first morning. "Charlotte, I need to talk to you about this situation." "What situation?" Charlotte tried to keep her voice steady. "Don't play dumb. The hospital has received dozens of calls from journalists this morning. This is affecting our work environment. My personal life doesn't interfere with my professional work. When your personal life appears on newspaper covers, it stops being just personal." The supervisor sighed. "I'm going to have to suspend you temporarily until this gets resolved." Charlotte felt the world collapse. "You can't do this. I didn't do anything wrong." "It's a preventive measure, for your own good too." Walking through Boston streets toward home, Charlotte felt like she was in a fishbowl exposed for everyone to see. People recognized her, pointed, whispered. Some even took pictures with their phones. Her apartment was surrounded by reporters. She had to use the back entrance to get to her own home. That night, the stories became crueler. "Gold digger or true love?" questioned one website. "How a nurse conquered a billionaire?" speculated another. The comments were worse, calling her a user, a fortune hunter, questioning her intentions and her morals. Oliver appeared at her door at 9 at night, walking past the reporters as if they didn't exist. "You shouldn't have come," Charlotte said, letting him in. "They're destroying you," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "Charlotte, I'm so sorry. I never imagined that—" "What?" "That dating a billionaire would have consequences." There was bitterness in her voice she couldn't hide. "Oliver, I was suspended from work. My job. The most important thing in my life besides you. My lawyers are working on it. We're going to sue for invasion of privacy, for defamation. And how long will that take? Weeks? Months? Charlotte stepped away from him, hugging her own arms. They're painting a picture of me that isn't true, and there's nothing I can do about it. The phone rang. She answered against her instincts. Charlotte Evans? An unfamiliar female voice. Who is this? I'm Rebecca Martinez from Channel 5 News. We'd like to give you the opportunity to tell your side of the story. The public deserves to know. Charlotte hung up, but the phone immediately rang again and again. She finally unplugged it. They're not going to stop, she said to Oliver. They're never going to stop. They will. These things pass. They always pass. For you, maybe. You have money, power, an entire public relations team. What do I have? A rented apartment and a job I just lost. Oliver approached, trying to touch her, but she backed away. Charlotte, don't let them tear us apart. They're not tearing us apart, Oliver. They're just showing how different our worlds are. She took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously on her belly. And now there's a baby in the middle of all this. Our baby will grow up loved and protected. I'll make sure of that. How? The question came out as a challenge. By hiring bodyguards? Changing schools with every scandal? Growing up knowing his mother is seen as a gold digger? Oliver fell silent because he had no answer for that. The next morning, the situation got worse. A morning television show did an entire segment on celebrity gold-digging relationships, using Charlotte as the main example. They brought in experts to analyze the behavioral pattern of women who target wealthy men. Charlotte watched in shock, seeing her life dissected by people who had never met her. She clearly positioned herself strategically, said a relationship expert. Working at a hospital that receives donations from his foundation, too much of a coincidence to be chance. That's when Oliver made the decision that would change everything. His public relations team had prepared a statement denying the relationship, painting Charlotte as an obsessed fan who had misinterpreted professional meetings. The text was ready, the press conference scheduled. It's the only way to protect you, he told Charlotte over the phone. If I deny everything, the press loses interest. You go back to your life. What about the baby? Long silence. We can say it's not mine. The words hit Charlotte like a punch to the stomach. You would deny your own child? To protect them? To protect both of you? Yes. Then you really don't know me, she said, her voice broken, because I could never live with that lie. And that's how Charlotte Evans realized that the man she loved was willing to deny her existence and their child's to save his own reputation. Charlotte closed the apartment door and leaned against it, listening to Oliver's footsteps fade down the hallway. The silence that followed was deafening, louder than all the reporters' shouts outside, heavier than all the headlines destroying her reputation. Her hands trembled when she picked up the phone and dialed her best friend, Sarah, who lived in Portland. Char, I saw the news. I need to get out of Boston, Charlotte interrupted, her voice breaking. Today. Now. What happened? I thought you two were going to face this together. Charlotte closed her eyes, still hearing the echo of Oliver's words. We can say it's not mine. He chose his empire. And I can't raise my child on a lie. 3 days later, Charlotte was in a tiny apartment on the other side of the city, in the Dorchester neighborhood. It was what she could afford with her savings. A simple place, far from the curious stares of Beacon Hill, far from the reporters, far from the life she had built. The apartment had thin walls, creaky floors, and a window that looked out onto a narrow alley. But it was hers, and no one there knew who she was. Oliver tried calling dozens of times on the first day. She turned off her phone. He showed up at the hospital. She wasn't working there anymore. He sent flowers to her old address. They wilted at the door of an empty apartment. Charlotte got a temporary job at a community clinic, away from the spotlight, where she could use her experience to help families who really needed it. The salary was a fraction of what she earned at the hospital, but at least no one whispered about her personal life. Weeks turned into months. Charlotte's belly grew, and with it, a loneliness that physically hurt. She talked to the baby during the long, silent nights. Your father is a good man, she would whisper, her hand over the increasingly pronounced curve. He just got lost. Sometimes people get lost when they have too much to lose. One night at the end of her 5th month of pregnancy, Charlotte was on the couch watching an old movie when she felt the first movement. A gentle flutter like butterflies dancing in her womb. She stayed completely still, waiting for it to happen again. And it did. A small ripple, definitive and real. "Hi, my love," she whispered, placing both hands on her belly. "You're really there, aren't you?" The baby responded with another movement, stronger this time, as if saying, "I'm here, Mummy." Charlotte began to cry, tears of joy mixed with deep sadness. "You miss him already, don't you?" she asked her belly. "I miss him too, every day." It was at that moment that someone knocked on the door. Charlotte froze. Very few people knew where she lived. Sarah in Portland, the clinic supervisor, and... "Charlotte, I know you're in there," Oliver's voice through the thin door. "Please, just give me 5 minutes." She remained silent, heart pounding. "I saw you leaving the clinic today. You look beautiful," his voice continued, softer now. "Your belly and our baby is growing." Charlotte approached the door but didn't open it. "It's been 4 months, Charlotte. 4 months that I haven't slept properly, that I can't concentrate on anything. The company almost went bankrupt twice because I can't stop thinking about you." "Then you shouldn't have denied our existence," she finally replied through the door. "I know. It was the worst decision of my life. I was scared, Charlotte. Scared of losing you, of losing the baby, scared that you'd become targets because of me. And now I know I've already lost you both, and it's worse than anything I imagined could happen." Charlotte pressed her forehead against the door. "Oliver, open the door, please. Let me see you. Let me see our child." With a trembling hand, Charlotte unlocked the door. Oliver looked different, thinner, tired eyes, disheveled hair. He looked at her as if he were seeing a miracle. "You're huge," he said. And it was so natural, so affectionate that Charlotte almost smiled. 5.5 months, she said, her hand instinctively on her belly. "Can I?" He pointed to her belly, hesitant. Charlotte nodded. Oliver knelt in front of her, placing his large hands on her belly with a reverence that broke her heart. The exact moment he touched, the baby kicked hard. Oliver's eyes widened. "He recognizes me," he whispered, looking up with tears in his eyes. "Or she," Charlotte corrected. "Or she." Oliver smiled, the first genuine expression of joy on his face in months. "She's strong, just like her mother," Charlotte said softly. Oliver stood up, and they stood face to face in the entrance of the tiny apartment. "Charlotte, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I chose wrong. I chose everything wrong. And now? What's changed? I don't care anymore. About the company, about what people will say, about anything. I only care about you two." He hesitated. "If there's still a chance. Any chance." Charlotte studied him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, but also the pain of the past months. "Oliver, you hurt me. Not just disappointed me. You hurt me in a way I didn't know was possible." "I know. And it's not just about me. It's about our child, about what kind of father he's going to have. Someone who will protect him, or someone who will deny him when things get tough?" "Someone who will protect him," Oliver said immediately. "Someone who will fight for him, for you, against anyone. I learned, Charlotte. The hard way. But I learned." The baby kicked again, stronger, as if trying to give his opinion on the conversation. Charlotte looked at Oliver, seeing the man she loved fighting with the man who had disappointed her. "Come in," she said finally. "But that doesn't mean everything is forgiven. It means that maybe we can talk." When Oliver entered the simple apartment, seeing how Charlotte had rebuilt her life away from him, he realized for the first time the true cost of his choices. And he knew that if she gave him a second chance, he would have to prove he was worthy of her. The emergency board meeting of Hartman Industries was scheduled for 8 in the morning on a cold Monday in March. Oliver entered the conference room on the top floor, where 12 men and women in impeccable suits awaited him with grave expressions. On the table, spread out like evidence of a crime, were newspapers and website printouts with headlines about his scandalous relationship. "Oliver, sit down," said Margaret Whitfield, the board chairwoman, her voice cutting like ice. "We need to resolve this situation immediately." "What situation?" Oliver asked, though he knew exactly what they were talking about. You know very well. Richard Montclair, the senior board member, pushed a newspaper in his direction. Your romantic adventures are affecting the company's image. Stock prices have dropped 12% in the last 2 weeks. Oliver looked at the headline, Billionaire Abandons Pregnant Nurse. Beside it, a photo of Charlotte leaving the clinic, clearly pregnant, with an expression of exhaustion that broke his heart. That's not true, he said quietly. Truth or lie is irrelevant, Margaret cut him off. What matters is public perception. And the perception is that you got a hospital employee pregnant and abandoned her. She's not a hospital employee. She's the woman I love. A heavy silence fell over the room. Robert Chen, the youngest board member, cleared his throat. Oliver, we all have indiscretions. It's part of life. But when these indiscretions affect business... It's not an indiscretion, Oliver interrupted, his voice hardening. It's my personal life. Your personal life stopped being personal the moment it became a headline, Margaret said. And now we have investors questioning your leadership ability, clients cancelling contracts, employees being questioned by reporters at the company entrance. Richard opened a folder and pulled out a document. We've prepared a solution. Oliver looked at the paper. It was a press release already written with the company letterhead. Mr. Oliver Hartman categorically denies any romantic relationship with Ms. Charlotte Evans. The meetings between them were strictly professional, related to the philanthropic activities of the Hartman Foundation. Any claim of paternity is unfounded and will be legally contested. The words danced in front of Oliver's eyes like poisonous snakes. You want me to deny my own child? We want you to save your company, Margaret said coldly. And yourself. This woman is clearly taking advantage of the situation. It's probably not even your child. It is my child. Oliver's voice came out low, dangerous. Prove it, Richard challenged. I don't need to prove anything to you. You do, Margaret leaned forward. Because if you don't sign this release today, by the end of the week, you won't be CEO of this company anymore. And without the company, Oliver, you're nothing. She won't even want you. Oliver looked around the table, seeing faces he'd known for years, people he considered allies, partners. Now they looked like vultures circling a carcass. So you're giving me an ultimatum. We're offering a solution, Robert said. Sign this, wait for the dust to settle, and in a few months everything goes back to normal. You can even help the girl financially, discreetly. The girl has a name, Charlotte Evans, and she's carrying my child. Allegedly your child, Richard corrected. Oliver stood up slowly. I need to think. You have until tomorrow morning, Margaret said. The press conference is scheduled for 10, with or without you. That night, Oliver drove to Charlotte's apartment. She let him in and they sat on the small couch, the weight of the decision he needed to make filling the space between them. They want me to deny you, he said finally. Deny the baby. Deny everything. Charlotte didn't seem surprised. And are you going to? Oliver looked at her, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, wearing a loose t-shirt that barely hid her round belly. She was more beautiful than ever. If I don't, I lose everything. The company, my position, probably most of my fortune. And if you do, I lose you both. Charlotte placed her hand on her belly. Oliver, I can't make this decision for you. But I can tell you one thing. Our child will grow up knowing the truth. No matter what you choose, he'll know who his father is. Oliver knelt in front of her, placing his hands on her belly. Would you forgive me if I chose you both and lost everything else? The question is, would you forgive me if you didn't choose us? The next morning, Oliver arrived at the company 2 hours before the press conference. Margaret and Richard were already in the conference room with the public relations team, finalizing the details. Great, you came, Margaret smiled. The statement is ready. You just need to sign it. Oliver looked at the paper one more time. The words seemed to burn his eyes. Where's the press conference? Main auditorium. We already have journalists from all the major outlets. Oliver nodded and walked to his desk. He sat down, picked up a pen, and for a long moment stared at the document. Then, slowly, he tore the paper in half. Oliver, Margaret screamed, what are you doing? Choosing, he said, standing up, for the first time in my life, choosing what really matters. He walked to the auditorium, where dozens of cameras and reporters awaited him. Without notes, without a prepared speech, Oliver approached the microphone. "Good morning," he began, and the silence was instant. "My name is Oliver Hartman, and I'm here to talk about the woman I love." At the back of the room, Margaret and Richard watched in horror. "Her name is Charlotte Evans. She's not a scandal, not an opportunist, not a gold digger. She's the most honest person I've ever met, a dedicated nurse who has spent her life caring for sick children, and the person who reminded me what really matters in life." Cameras clicked frantically. "We're expecting a child together, our first child. And yes, I love her. I love her more than this company, more than my fortune, more than my reputation." The murmur in the room grew. "Therefore, effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as CEO of Hartman Industries." The auditorium exploded. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed. Margaret had to lean against the wall for support. "Because some things," Oliver continued when the noise died down, "are more important than power. And the love I feel for Charlotte and our child is one of those things." When he left the auditorium, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters, Oliver felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. He had lost an empire, but he had finally chosen what really mattered. The first 24 hours after the press conference were a hurricane. Oliver's phone rang incessantly. Journalists, furious investors, shocked friends, and Margaret Whitfield leaving increasingly hysterical voicemails about fixing this disaster. He turned off the device and threw it in a drawer. Charlotte watched the live press conference from the waiting room of the clinic, where she was waiting for her routine prenatal appointment. When Oliver said, "The person who reminded me what really matters in life," she put her hand to her heart, feeling it race. When he resigned from his position, tears came without warning. "Are you okay, dear?" asked the receptionist, concerned. "I am," Charlotte whispered, still looking at the screen. "I think everything is finally okay." That night, Oliver appeared at her apartment door with a bag of Chinese food and eyes red from exhaustion. "I saw the press conference," Charlotte said, letting him in. "And you're an idiot," she said, but she was smiling. "A brave and completely crazy idiot." Oliver set the food on the small table and turned to her. "Charlotte, you lost everything for us. I didn't lose everything. I gained everything." He approached, placing his hands on her face. "I got you back. I got the chance to be the father our child deserves. I got my soul back." They kissed right there in the tiny apartment, while outside the world continued spinning without caring about fallen tycoons. But the consequences came quickly and were brutal. The next morning, Oliver received a call from his personal accountant. "Oliver, we need to talk. Urgent." In David Kaufman's office, numbers spread across the table like open wounds. "The board is freezing your assets," David explained, nervously adjusting his glasses. "They claim you violated conduct clauses in your CEO contract. Your accounts are blocked until they resolve the legal situation." "And how long will that take?" "Months, maybe years if they really want to fight." Oliver looked out the window, seeing the city he had conquered and that now rejected him. "How much is left?" "In personal accounts they can't touch? About 200,000. Roughly what a mid-level executive makes in a year." Oliver almost laughed at the irony. "From billionaire to middle class in 48 hours. "And the house?" "It's in the company's name. You'll have to move out." That afternoon, Oliver returned to Charlotte's apartment with a single suitcase and the humility of someone who had lost everything except what really mattered. "They took everything from me," he told her, sitting on the living room floor because the couch only fit 1.5 people. "Not everything," Charlotte said, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "You still have us. Charlotte, do you understand what this means? I can't give you the life you deserve. I can't give our child the security that—" "Oliver," her voice was firm, "do you think I fell in love with your money, with your position? No, but I fell in love with the man who talked to Ethan about dinosaurs afraid of needles, the man who watched how I held my water glass on our first dinner, the man who secretly wrote poetry." She pressed his hand against her belly. "This baby doesn't need an empire, he needs a father." In the following weeks, Oliver discovered a version of himself he didn't know. He looked for a job, something he hadn't done since his early 20s. It was humiliating. Executives who used to bow to him now barely returned his calls. "Mr. Hartman," said a headhunter in a particularly embarrassing interview, "your resume is impressive, but given recent circumstances, clients are concerned about your emotional stability." "My emotional stability has never been better," Oliver replied, and realized it was true. Finally, he got a position at a small consulting firm, earning less in a month than he used to spend on wine in a week. But when he came home and found Charlotte cooking on the tiny stove, humming to her growing belly, he felt richer than he had ever been. "How was your day?" she would ask, like millions of wives asked millions of husbands around the world. "Long, but it ended with me getting here," he would reply, kissing her neck while she stirred the sauce. One night, while assembling a used crib that Oliver had bought at a thrift store, Charlotte stopped in the middle of the activity. "Do you regret it?" "What?" "Giving up everything." Oliver put down the screwdriver and looked around the small apartment. The walls were thin, the heating weak, the view was of an alley. 6 months ago, he would have considered this place uninhabitable. "You want to know what I had before?" he asked. "A house with 12 bedrooms where I slept alone, an office on the top floor where I worked until 2 in the morning because I had no reason to go home. Enough money to buy anything except what I really wanted." "And what did you really want?" "This." He pointed to the half-assembled crib, to Charlotte with messy hair and hands on her belly, to the simple and imperfect life they had built. A family, a home, someone to come back to. Charlotte approached and kissed him softly. "Even when the baby is born, and we don't sleep for months. Even when we have to count pennies to pay the bills. Especially then," Oliver smiled, "because I'll finally know what money is for. To take care of the people we love." Outside, Boston continued its frenzied dance of ambition and power. Inside the small apartment in Dorchester, a former billionaire and a nurse were building something no money in the world could buy: true love and the promise of a family. And for the first time in his life, Oliver Hartman was genuinely happy. The farm in Colorado Valley appeared on an obscure rural property website at affordable prices, advertised as "Farmhouse on 15-acre property needs repairs." The photos showed a faded wooden house with a porch that extended across the entire front, surrounded by fields that had once been cultivated and now grew wild. "It's perfect," Charlotte said, running her hand over her 8-month belly while looking at the images on the borrowed laptop. "It needs a lot of work," Oliver observed, but there was something in his voice and an excitement he hadn't felt in months. "We have time and hands." She took his hand, now calloused from work at the consulting firm. "Imagine our child running through those fields, playing in the creek." A week later, they were driving a used pickup truck along Colorado's winding roads, everything they owned packed in the truck bed. Charlotte complained about Braxton Hicks' contractions, and Oliver stopped every hour for her to stretch her legs and breathe the pure mountain air. The house was worse than the photos suggested, but also better. Worse because the roof leaked, the plumbing made strange noises, and the electricity worked intermittently. Better because it had soul. Wood that told stories in every groove, windows that framed views of snow-covered mountains, and a large kitchen with an oak table that seemed to have fed generations of families. "This is it," Charlotte said, standing on the porch looking at the golden fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Are you sure? We can still go back to Boston, find a better apartment." "Oliver." She turned to him, and there was absolute determination in her eyes. "This is where our child is going to be born." And he was. Matthew James Hartman came into the world on a snowy December morning, 3 weeks early, at the hospital in Gunnison, the nearest town. Oliver held Charlotte through the first contraction at 5 in the morning, and only let go of her hand 12 hours later, when Matthew's strong and indignant cry filled the delivery room. "He's got your lungs," the doctor laughed, placing the baby on Charlotte's chest. Oliver looked at his son, small, red, perfect, and felt something break and remake itself inside his chest. "Hi, Matthew," he whispered, gently touching the tiny, clenched hand. "I'm your dad." Matthew opened dark eyes, just like his mother's, and seemed to study Oliver for a long moment before closing them again, satisfied. "He recognizes you," Charlotte murmured, exhausted but radiant. "Like recognizing home," Oliver completed. The first months in Colorado Valley were a symphony of discoveries. Oliver learned to change diapers at 3 in the morning, to distinguish between hunger cries and sleepy cries, to make Matthew stop crying just by holding him against his chest and humming melodies he made up on the spot. During the day, while Matthew slept, Oliver worked on the house. He learned to fix leaks, replace rotted boards, paint walls with discounted paint they bought in town. His hands, which had once signed million-dollar contracts, now grew calloused with nails and wood. Charlotte nursed Matthew in the kitchen while planning a garden for spring. "We'll plant tomatoes over there," she would say, pointing out the window. "And herbs near the kitchen. Matthew can help us when he's bigger. Can you picture him at 3 running around with dirt up to his knees?" Oliver smiled. "I picture him at 16, bringing girlfriends home and being embarrassed because his parents still kiss in the kitchen. We're going to embarrass him a lot," Oliver laughed, pulling her into a kiss he savored slowly. The nearest neighbors, Jim and Martha Stevens, lived 2 kilometers away and had lived in the region their entire lives. Martha showed up with beef stew on the second day after they returned from the hospital. "Welcome to the valley," she said, handing over the still warm pot. "Heard you folks came from the big city." "Boston," Charlotte confirmed, bouncing Matthew in her arms. "Long way from home," Jim observed, but there was no judgment in his voice. "Actually," Oliver said, looking at Charlotte and Matthew, "we're exactly where we're supposed to be." The Stevens became like substitute grandparents to Matthew and mentors to Oliver and Charlotte in the art of country living. Jim taught Oliver about soil, about when to plant what, about how to read the weather in the clouds. Martha showed Charlotte how to make preserves, how to prepare the house for the harsh mountain winter, how to find the best wild berries in season. "You two have something special," Martha said one afternoon, watching Oliver teach Matthew, now 6 months old, to help in the garden while Charlotte prepared lemonade in the kitchen. "Don't see much of that these days." "What do you see?" Charlotte asked. "People who actually like each other, not just love. Everyone says they have that, but you enjoy being together. You have fun. That's rare." That night, after Matthew had fallen asleep, Oliver and Charlotte danced on the porch under the stars, with only the sound of crickets and wind in the fields as their soundtrack. There was no music, but they didn't need music when they had that moment. "Do you miss it?" Charlotte asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "What?" "The life you had, the power, the importance." Oliver stopped dancing and looked at her. "Charlotte, do you want to know what the most important day of my life as CEO was?" "What?" "None of them. I can't remember a single day that actually mattered." He spun her gently. "But I can tell you about the most important day of my life now." "What?" "Today. And yesterday. And tomorrow when I wake up and you'll be there, and Matthew will be in his crib and I'll make coffee while you nurse him, and we'll plan which part of the fence we're going to fix." Oliver smiled. "Every day matters now." Charlotte stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, long and sweet under Colorado's starry sky. "I love you, Oliver Hartman. I love you, Charlotte Evans. Soon to be Charlotte Hartman." "Soon?" Oliver knelt right there on the porch of the house they had transformed into a home and pulled from his pocket a simple ring, not an expensive diamond, but a gold band that had belonged to Martha's grandmother, which the elderly woman had insisted on lending until you can afford to buy your own. "Charlotte Evans, will you marry me? Not because I have something to offer you, but because I can't imagine a single day without you." Charlotte laughed and cried at the same time. Yes, 1,000 times yes. And there, surrounded by golden fields and under an infinite sky, they began planning a wedding that would be as simple and true as the life they had built together. The Cedar Creek wooden chapel had existed since 1892, built by the valley's first settlers. Too small for a large congregation, perfect for a love that didn't need an audience. The worn wooden pews could seat at most 20 people, and the simple glass windows framed views of the Rocky Mountains that served as grander decoration than any floral arrangement. Oliver spent the morning of the wedding chopping wood, not because he needed to, but because his nerves demanded physical activity. Matthew, now 8 months old, sat on the blanket at his feet, clapping every time the axe split the wood. "Nervous?" asked Jim Stevens, who had offered to be a witness. "Terrified," Oliver admitted, running his hand through his hair. "What if she changes her mind? What if she realizes she can do better than a broke ex-billionaire who can barely tell a hammer from a wrench?" Jim laughed, picking Matthew up. "Son, That woman chose you when you had everything. She chose you when you lost everything. Why the hell would she change her mind today? On the other side of the valley, at the Stevens house, Charlotte was having her own moment of panic while Martha helped with the dress. A simple white cotton model they'd found at a thrift shop in Gunnison. "What if I don't know how to be a real wife?" Charlotte asked, looking at herself in the antique mirror in the guest room. "What if—" "Honey," Martha interrupted, adjusting the simple veil, made from lace from the chapel's own curtain. "You two are already married in everything that matters. Today is just to let God and the government know officially." The wedding was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon, when October's golden light would create the perfect atmosphere. The guests were few but meaningful. Jim and Martha Stevens, Pastor John Mackenzie, Sarah, who had driven 16 hours from Portland to be there, Dr. Harrison, the doctor who brought Matthew into the world, and his wife, Ellen. Oliver arrived first, wearing the only suit he owned now, a simple navy blue one he'd bought on clearance. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie for the 10th time. "You doing all right, son?" asked Pastor Mackenzie, a 60-year-old man with kind eyes and a graying beard. "I've been waiting for this moment since I first saw her," Oliver said. "I just didn't expect it to be so intense." Matthew was in Sarah's arms, wearing a light blue romper that Charlotte had hand-sewn, with a small bow that Martha had insisted on adding. At exactly 4 o'clock, the chapel doors opened. Charlotte appeared like a ray of sunshine, the simple dress enhancing her natural beauty, the veil dancing in the gentle afternoon breeze. She had no father to walk her down the aisle, so she walked alone down the short corridor, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning. Oliver felt his knees weaken. She was radiant, incandescent, perfect. When Charlotte reached the altar, Oliver extended his hand, and she took it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he replied, smiling like a lovesick teenager. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Mackenzie began, but his voice seemed to come from far away. Oliver and Charlotte were lost in each other's eyes, the rest of the world blurred at the edges. When it came time for vows, Oliver took a folded paper from his pocket, but then put it back. "Charlotte," he began, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "I wrote a speech. 3 pages about how you saved me, about how you taught me what true love is, about how our son is the most beautiful miracle I could imagine." Charlotte smiled, tears already shining in her eyes. "But the truth is simpler than that." Oliver took both her hands. "I promise to wake up every day and choose you. When you're sick, when you're angry, when our teenage son hates us, when we're old and cranky, I promise to work hard to deserve you every day of my life, and I promise to never, ever forget how lucky I am to have found you." Charlotte took a deep breath, trying to control the tears that threatened to smear what little makeup she wore. "Oliver, you asked me once why I chose you. The truth is that you chose me first, at the hospital, when you could have walked right past Ethan's room but stopped to observe. You saw me when I didn't even know I wanted to be seen." Her voice grew stronger, clearer. "I promise to be your partner in everything, in joy and difficulty, on difficult mornings when Matthew won't stop crying, on nights when you're too tired to talk but need to know I'm here. I promise to build a life with you that our children will want to imitate. And I promise to love you not despite who you've become, but exactly because of it." There wasn't a dry eye in the small chapel. "The rings," the pastor requested. They were simple gold bands, bought with money Oliver had saved working overtime at the consulting firm. When they exchanged them, it was as if each was giving not just a ring but a promise that no matter what came, they would face it together. "By the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Oliver, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was sweet, promising, and when they separated, Matthew began clapping from Sarah's lap, as if he knew something important had happened. The reception was on the house's porch, with string lights that Oliver had installed that morning, a long table made of boards and sawhorses, and food prepared by all the guests. Martha had made a simple 3-tier cake, Jim had brought his famous roast beef, and Dr. Harrison had insisted on contributing a case of the best wine Gunnison had to offer. When the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky pink and gold, Oliver and Charlotte danced their first dance as husband and wife on the lawn in front of the house, with Matthew in their arms between them. "How do you feel, Mrs. Hartman?" Oliver asked. "Complete," Charlotte replied. "For the first time in my entire life, completely complete." Later, after the guests had left and Matthew had finally fallen asleep, Oliver and Charlotte sat on the porch, Charlotte nestled between his legs in a rocking chair that Jim had made as a wedding gift. "We did it," Oliver whispered against her hair. "What did we do?" "Everything. A wedding, a family, a home, a life worth living." Charlotte turned to look at him. "Do you regret anything? Losing the company, the money, the old life?" Oliver looked around, at the house they had restored together, at the fields they would start planting in spring, at the bedroom window where their son slept peacefully. "Charlotte, 2 years ago I was one of the richest men in the world, but I was completely empty. Today I have exactly $1,200 in the bank, calluses on my hands, and I'm the richest man who ever lived. Why? Because I have you. I have Matthew, I have this." He gestured to the simple life they had built. "I have a love that's real, a family that's mine, a purpose that goes beyond numbers in a bank account." They rocked in silence for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the country night. Crickets, wind in the trees, the distant flow of the creek. "Oliver." "I think I'm pregnant again." Oliver stopped rocking completely. "Really?" "I've suspected for a few weeks but wasn't sure, until this morning when the smell of bacon made me nauseous just like the first time." Oliver turned her in the chair to face him. "Are you sure?" "Not completely, but..." Charlotte smiled. "My body is telling me things I've learned to recognize." Oliver kissed her deeply, then knelt in front of the chair and placed his hand on her still flat belly. "Hi, baby number 2, he whispered. "If you're really in there, welcome to the craziest and happiest family in Colorado." Charlotte laughed, running her fingers through his hair. 2 children, a farm, an ex-billionaire who learned to change diapers and fix leaks. Sounds like the beginning of a joke. Sounds like the beginning of a perfect life. They stayed there until late at night, planning the future, dreaming about the children they would raise in that valley, about the family they would continue building one day at a time. And when they finally went inside to sleep, Oliver took one last look at the view from his porch, golden fields under infinite stars, and knew he had found not only the love of his life, but also his place in the world. Sometimes, he thought, you need to lose everything to discover what really matters, and what really mattered was sleeping beside him, growing in her belly, and breathing softly in the crib in the next room. A family, a home, a love for life. He had achieved everything. And so Oliver discovered that true wealth isn't measured by numbers in a bank account, but by the arms that welcome us at the end of the day, by the laughter of a child who carries our blood, and by the courage to choose love when the whole world asks us to choose power. Sometimes you have to lose an empire to find a home. Sometimes you have to give up everything to discover what really matters, because in the end it's not titles that define who we are, it's who we choose to fight for when everything is on the line. And perhaps deep down, this story also speaks about each of us, about the choices we make when heart and reason come into conflict. If this story touched you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, where are you listening to this from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing stories like this.